if you guys are just joining, I'll have to give this intro again in a second. But I look forward to your questions. Any general language learning questions, hit me with them. Be very happy to see how I can help you all today. And let me change the position of the window I'm looking at. Here we go. Yes. So I'm already seeing first questions coming in from Facebook, and when I'm live on the rest. Oh. Not connected to YouTube live chat. Alright, so hey there, Ducky 1am. You can see YouTube isn't popping up right now, so I can fix that in a second. Oh, they're still loading, that's why. Okay, so how's everybody doing today? I am very glad to be giving you some general language learning advice if I can help you. So Ducky says I am back. Good to see you back, Ducky. And Cosmic Leader says Jigrich Roboglot Konstatu Tomagahintach. Roboglot is my automatic assistant over on Mixer, and if you guys are seeing this on YouTube, then you should check out Mixer, because I'm going to be doing the rest of the Q&As over there today. Wanted to start with a nice one with everyone here. I can see my YouTube live chat thing isn't working, so I want to just get that up and running before I go ahead with everything. If you're watching this after the fact, then you can click below in the description and you'll be able to see timestamps of all the questions I'm going to go through in this entire live stream. Otherwise, there's multiple other specific Q&As that I'm going to be doing all on Mixer, so the link in the top right, go there, follow me. You can see I've got a little follower goal right about here, and trying to reach 300 on Mixer, so I appreciate you guys following me over there. And yeah, so let me just make sure I got your YouTube comments coming in. You can see I'm seeing comments now from Mixer, I'm seeing them on Facebook, and if I can't get it working, then Holly is actually going to pass the questions over to me. Holly is the moderator. You can see at the top I've pointed her out, so you'll be able to find her. Okay, now while I'm clicking around to figure it out, Paulino over on Facebook asks, Saluton Benny, what are your favorite sources of comprehensible input for beginners? By the way, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Langfest. I'm looking forward to seeing you too at Langfest, Paulino. That's a very good question. I wanted to cover first steps specifically in about an hour and a half. So I'm going to do a separate live stream for that. And that's a very good first question. So Holly's going to take a note of that. I might start with that question. So anything not related to the very first steps learning a language, pronunciation, travel, or country specific, that's what I'm going to cover in this video. Okay. So I can see other questions popping in. So let me see if I can get my chat thing working now. Here we go. Yeah. You see? Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Just need to reposition this right about there and delete the other one. And we'll make this red because it's YouTube, and YouTube red is a nicer color. That's kind of a brownish red, or that's a pink. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that, everybody. So there's going to be lots of questions popping up on YouTube, and I want to make sure that I am getting to everything. So Holly is going to be passing me the most ideal questions, and I'm going to tackle it as she sends them. But very quickly, here on Mixer, I'm seeing that Cosmic Leader said, how quickly should one seek out native speakers when learning a language? Very good question there. So native speakers, I would say as soon as possible, but it kind of depends on your goals. So in my case, I try to speak the language as soon as possible. And that's great, but if your goal is to kind of have an overall view of the language, to be able to pass an exam and so on, then seeking out native speakers for that may not be as beneficial. And if it's your very, very first project, and you find native speakers that are not your teachers, for instance, they tend to speak too quickly, then you may actually be better finding other learners. In my case, for instance, my first language that I learned was, first foreign language was Spanish. And very glad that I learned it. But the catch was that the native speakers in Spain spoke far too quickly for me. So anytime I would try to speak with them, unfortunately, I would find it too intimidating, and I'd almost feel like giving up, you know. But I found Erasmus students, and I spoke with them, and they were fellow foreigners also learning Spanish, and they spoke slowly. They used easier vocabulary. So in that case, not hanging out with native speakers for the first initial period was beneficial to me. Having said that, if you got a private teacher, especially if it's over Skype, where it's cheaper that way, or you know, whatever video or audio calling tool you'd be using, I would say a native speaker could help you as long as they're experienced in talking to beginners in general, or language learners, because they'll adjust a little bit, and you do need a little bit of adjustment just in the initial stages. So I hope that answers the question. Ducky's asking how I gained 20 followers since yesterday. Ducky, on Mixer, I actually emailed my my list, and I said, everyone come over to Mixer, I'm going to do some live videos today. So that's why you're seeing a bigger number there. So as a reminder, anyone who's just appeared here, check out mixer.com/polyglot. You see in the top right. I'm going to be continuing these Q&As for the next 4 hours actually. Okay, so Brian Torres asks on YouTube, what's your recording time getting to a C level, and in which language? Your record time. Sorry, I misread that. All right, just wanted to update Holly on something. All right, so my record time getting to C level. That would be German. Because what I did was I learned German in school, and it's tricky to like get a record time because I was learning it in school for 5 years, but after all those 5 years, I would say at best I would have had an A2 level. And that's like very, very optimistic, because I couldn't even order a train ticket when I first got to Berlin, or whatever the first trip to Germany I had was. So it's tricky to count that as 5 years, because the way I was learning, I didn't care and so on. Whereas when I first got to Germany, I like to actually properly learn the language. I was there for, I think, 4 months when I was getting ready to sit the C2 exam. I passed 4 out of 5 sections of it. So it's why if you phrase your question as record time for C level, since I'd say like I confidently reached the C1 level, since I wouldn't have reached the C2 since I didn't pass the entire exam. So for that was, it was like years and years of kind of passive exposure to the language, meaning it wasn't as foreign to me, even though I didn't have any real skills in it. And then 4 months of absolute intensive learning. But keep in mind that German is a Germanic language. It's related to English, so I had that advantage. And I had been learning languages at that stage for maybe 6 years, so I had a very I had vastly improved my language learning strategy. Whereas if I had tried to learn to a C level in my very first language in a short time, that wouldn't have worked. So my record time, I would say, is 4 months plus lots of non-intensive time, if that answers that question. All right. So let's see. Rasmus asks, I hope you're doing well. How would you go about thinking in a language? That was an interesting question. I like this. I sometimes feel learning vocabulary makes me speak English with words of the target language. For example, speaking English with Danish words instead of speaking Danish. Okay. So, to think in a language, this is a tricky thing because how you would define that and understand that it would change between different people. So, for instance, you might imagine that if you think in a language, you would, like, your inner monologue would continue in that language. And in my case, the inner monologue isn't, I don't really think of that as a language. I think that, like, how our thought process works isn't really vocabulary based. It's more conceptual. So I don't really think that we think in specific languages, but your inner monologue, that's something you can control and something I actually intentionally try to control. And I try to, if I can, like intentionally think the basic things that I want, that I'm trying to get a hold of in the language. So I might very simply think, oh, I'm out of milk, and like in my head think that in the language. So you can think in the language a lot faster if you intentionally help yourself do that. Another way that can help with that is if you, for instance, instead of looking the words up in a dictionary, if you look them up in a visual dictionary of some sort. So for instance, if you use Google Images and then you look up, the example I always like to give people is voiture, so car in French. So you would look up voiture in Google Images and you see the thing with the four wheels and you don't think of that C word, you know. In this case, our C word is C-A-R. So you don't try to think of that. You just think of the concept of the thing with the four wheels. And that way you don't tend to have this translation via your mother tongue as you're learning the language, which is great because that helps you to like begin to actually think in that language. So that's kind of what I would suggest if that helps with your Danish. I hope it does. All right. So next question. Do you recommend learning Esperanto before or after learning German? Okay, well, this is an interesting question because it won't apply to everybody. And just before I get into that, I can see all the questions coming up here. Appreciate that, everybody. I know that I'm going to have a lot less people in just over an hour in Mixer because I know all the Facebook, all the YouTube, you guys, less of you will come to Mixer. So anyone who does come, I will actually be able to say hi. I can see a bunch of questions popping up here, but I'm trying to kind of stick to specific ones. So just a reminder, go to mixer.com/polyglot, sign up. It links with your Xbox account. It links with your Outlook and Hotmail, whatever Microsoft related account. And then for the rest of the afternoon after this one, I'll actually be able to talk to you way more one-on-one. Okay? For now, I'm actually just mostly looking at what Holly is passing me on. So hopefully I'll get to as many of your questions as I can. So on the Esperanto question, they actually did this study where they found that people who learned Esperanto first tended to be better at learning a second language. I believe, I don't have the exact numbers right, but I think it was something like they had one group of students learn French for 2 years, and one group of students learn French for 1 year. And and then Esperanto for 1 year before that. So they actually learned less French. And that group who learned Esperanto first got better results in their French exam, even though they learned half of it. So there's this thing that I've always believed, that you don't just learn a language, you learn the process of learning languages. That's why I was saying before that my German, I could do that so much faster, mainly because I had 6 years of intensively learning other languages, even if they were unrelated. But in the case of Esperanto, it actually tends to have a lot of common vocabulary with other European languages. So Esperanto is designed to be specifically easy. So it's why I tend to say, if you really want to get into languages and you can kind of manage your time in the right way, I would intensively learn Esperanto, not for Esperanto. I mean, I happen to love the communities of Esperanto. I like the language and I love speaking it. But even if you don't ever plan to use it, if you learn it intensively, and get the skills of learning languages, then switch to the language you do want to learn, then you would be surprised. You'll actually do a little bit better than if you had just focused on that one language the entire time. It depends on the person, depends on the goals, of course, but that is something I happen to recommend. So I hope that advice helps. Okay, so Marbella asks, what language are you learning or improving these days, if any? Yes, I kind of teased on the email list that I'm getting into a new language project, and I can kind of reveal just to you guys here in the live chat that is going to be rebooting my Mandarin. I'm actually going to try to, because like I had this Mandarin project intensively over several months, I think 5 months total. It was 3 months in Taiwan and then 2 months traveling through China. And I was very happy I didn't reach fluency, I reached a kind of conversational level. And I was very proud of that. But since that was several years ago, my language level has gone down because I haven't been practicing it consistently. So I'm going to try and give it a boost. And I'm sure many of you who have in the past intensively learned a language over a certain period, and you've been pretty happy with where you got it, but then not practiced it for a while. You might be in the same boat as me for my Mandarin, and hopefully as I kind of share that, and I'll probably be updating, if I'm updating daily, I would do that on Mixer over the next few weeks as I get back into it. So make sure to follow me there. And I'm going to see how, if I can get it, like the goal won't be to master Mandarin. The goal will be in the first part of the project to get back to where I was at the end of my 5 months of previous learning. So I don't know how long that will take. I'll try to make a plan, make it realistic given my workload, and we'll see how I go. And I hope anything I would share on that would help you guys. So yeah, that's going to be my most immediate next language project. Okay, so I hope that helps, Marabella. So Anorex Forever on YouTube says, how do you practice your American Sign Language? Very good question. So this one has always depended on where I lived. So I actually got practice in person with people when I lived in Austin, Texas, because Austin has a very large school of the deaf, and I would actually just hang out in that area, and there were people I knew, and there were events taking place, and I would just try to attend those. And then in Washington, D.C., I lived close to Gallaudet University. Now here in New York, there are actually a lot of ASL meetups and stuff, so I'm actually gearing up towards getting into that. But of course, you know, you can't take on every project at once. I would love it if I could intensely improve my ASL, my Mandarin, everything else at the same time, but I'm gonna focus on specifically Mandarin for the next few months. And then when I'm happy that that's at a certain level that I can maintain it for a while, I'll switch and prioritize my sign language, and then I'll be able to go to meetups here in New York and to actually improve it, like how to practice it when I'm doing that. If you don't live in a city that happens to have a large population or be close to a deaf school, just do it over Skype. I actually learned the majority of my sign language with an italki teacher, and sign language is actually a great one to learn via video call. And I would just turn the audio off and I would try to sign, and then I would get taught back how to sign with them on the other end. And you don't actually need to be there in person. The one thing that you don't think about is, like, right now, if I was to use sign language with you guys, it wouldn't work because you could just see my head. Whereas I would have to move back and make sure I'm like actually a little bit distant from the camera so that you could see my torso. Look at this, guys. I got a booster. How do you boost a language you've studied before but haven't practiced for a while? Thanks for that, Paulino. Alright, boost a language that I haven't practiced for a while. Well, I'm about to figure that out. And thanks again for the super chat boost, appreciate that. So what I'm going to do with the booster project is I'm going to take beginner notes. So if, let's say, for argument's sake, I reasoned that my level was the equivalent to the European B1 level. So let's say that's what I want to get back to. What I would do is I actually here have a bunch of beginner materials. So these are if you want to boost a language to get back to where it was before, you have materials for the levels up to that, and then you just revise them very quickly. So I plan to actually go through these books as if I was studying it as a beginner, but then just very fast. So I don't have to spend the same amount of time because I'm revising things. So I'm going to go through my beginner study books and remember the things I likely would have forgotten or that have slipped my mind. And then, so do that same process, it's kind of like what I have planned, and I may update this, but hopefully it helps answer your question, Paulino. What I've planned is to do all of the things I had done before, just in a much faster time period. So, for instance, to improve my listening comprehension, I like to use the Podcast 101 series, and I'm going to be listening to that as I improve my level. But I would start probably not at the very earliest one, but maybe one step above that, and listen to that a couple of times, and once I'm like, okay, this is easy, then boost it up a level. So that's kind of my plan for boosting, is to go through just the learning materials I had before, and of course just lots of spoken practice. And again, the spoken practice, I'm going to have the same kind of theme, that the very first ones will be simple conversations, because I'm probably not going to be able to have the same complexity of conversations I had at the end of my previous project. So I'd have simple things of like, oh, I'm Benny, I'm from Ireland. And then maybe I'll see after one lesson, okay, yeah, I remember all that. That's fine. I don't need to go through that again. But then the next session, I would aim to have like that A2 conversation. So I hope that's answered your question. That's my plan for boosting a language I haven't practiced lately. But I may adjust that, because this is the first proper intensive learning project I'm going to have for that. And otherwise, thanks for that little super chat boost. That's actually the very first time I've seen that. I put the animation thing here in anticipation in case anyone would have done that. Okay, so let's see, what other questions have you guys had in the queue for Holly? Just as a reminder, if you're just appearing here, I'm going to be doing this for about a half hour further, maybe a little bit longer. And then 1 hour from now, I'm going to start several more hours of specifically the first steps in learning language, pronunciation, travel, and then we'll get back to another general language learning in case I missed anyone's questions. And that's going to be on Mixer, mixer.com/polyglot, top right. Go there, link to your Microsoft account if you have one, and then follow me. I got a little follower goal that I'm really hoping to reach, and you guys can help me with that. That's kind of why I'm talking about this so much, because if I get to that 300, I become a partner. Yay, a Mixer partner, and I get all these things I can do to get more promotions and help more people learn languages, which is what my goal is. All right. So next question then is, how can I use your Spanish book to get to B2? This is from Young J on YouTube. This would be the language hacking Spanish book. That I wouldn't say is going to get you to B2. What the purpose of that is, I can see a bunch of people following me here. You see the little notifications on the right. Thanks for that, everybody. I'm going to write you all little personal messages after this. So the language hacking Spanish, we intentionally did not want that to have a specific European Common Framework target goal, because a European Common Framework level tends to include speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and we only focus on speaking and a little bit of listening comprehension, not the same level of thoroughness. But there we go. So I would say the language hacking Spanish book is what I would recommend people to start with if your priority is speaking. And then when you finish that, then you would go on to using another course. And what we did is we tied it in with the Teach Yourself courses. And the Teach Yourself courses do tend to aim to B2 levels. They have little notification things with a European Union flag and everything. And you'll see which courses get you to B2. So I know they would have one for Spanish for sure. So if you're starting off in the language, then you would kind of tie in with a Teach Yourself book. but you wouldn't use my language hacking book to get you to B2 because its purpose is to get you to have your first conversations in a language. Hope that distinction makes sense. Okay, so let's see what was next here. So Cosmic Leader 244 asks on Mixer, how competent in Gaeilge, that's Irish, for anyone who doesn't know, the Irish language, is the average Irishman? If I was learning, could I use it with them? Yeah, very tricky question, because unfortunately the situation with the Irish language in Ireland is that when we gained independence, which is slightly over 100 years ago, just 101 years ago, we wanted Irish to be our national language, because English had been, since Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. So we wanted Irish to be the national language. Unfortunately, the way that we tried to make that happen was to like force it in an academic way on people, and it's such a pity. It's very fortunately changed in recent years, but because of that, it actually put a lot of people off the language. Unfortunately, I was among them. Right now, I love the Irish language. I've had opportunities to use it socially. I've used it to have a chat with even the President of Ireland at the time. So it has really enriched my life. But before then, in my mind, like as a teenager, I just saw it as this dying language because they taught these old boring books to us in school, and it didn't seem relevant to me as a teenager. And that's changed now. We have Irish TV and there's a lot of Irish websites, so its role has changed. But because of how it was for at least my generation, any generations before that, hopefully less so in the coming generations, but because of that, you will find a lot of people who just can't say anything. They know a few silly phrases, but they don't really know how to say several basic things. And I couldn't even say my name is in Irish after learning it for almost 10 years, which shows how bad the particular academic approach of teaching it was, unfortunately. So that's the problem, and because of that, the average Irishman, like depending on where you go, if you are in a major city or a large town in many parts of the country, and you pick a random person and try to speak Irish to them, then they're not going to be able to help you, other than knowing a couple of words that kind of linger in their mind. So that's unfortunate. But if you go to other parts of the country, if you go to the west, around Galway, you go to the northwest around Donegal, you go to certain parts of Cork and Kerry and lots of other places, you have the Gael-talked areas. And in those areas, your chances of meeting somebody randomly who speaks Irish are dramatically higher. And then in Dublin, there's lots of events that people go to speak Irish, and if you happen to go to those, you'll be able to find people. So fortunately, the situation is changing, but up to now, you would have to be more strategic in the kind of people you find. There was a documentary of a guy who actually tried to go around the country forcing people to speak Irish with him, and it didn't go well, and it's because of his whole attitude was wrong, that you just try to like find random people and speak it to them. What I did that I think helped differently for me to expose myself to the language is I just wore a t-shirt that said, Lor Gaelgalum, speak Irish to me. And when I wore it in Dublin, I had multiple conversations with random people, but rather than me deciding who I'm going to pick, I kind of give them the opportunity to come to me. And, you know, a waitress that I ordered food off spoke it to me. So that you can open yourself up to those opportunities. You can find communities to help you speak the language. But in general, if you get to Ireland, like I said, in major cities, walk up to random people, it's not as likely that you're going to be able to speak Irish with them. Okay? So, hope that answers that question. All right, so moving on. Over on YouTube, Brandon asks, how difficult was transitioning between talking Castilian Spanish and Spanish with Latin Americans? It's a very good question, and I'm going to actually do that at my 3 p.m. travel and country slot. Okay, so Holly can take a note of that, and I'll use that as one of my very first questions. That's a very good, like, travel-related adjustment question. Okay, Rasmus on Facebook asks, regarding thinking in the language, how about a monolingual dictionary? Okay, somebody suggested it. but I think as a beginner it might be a big struggle. So I'm going to take that in my first steps, whether a monolingual dictionary is good for a beginner. So I'll do that if you can check out the Mixer live stream in about 1 hour, okay? And it'll be available like afterwards offline if you want to check it after, but if you want to see that live, then come do that. So stocking up on the questions ahead of time now. Okay, Jordan PCK on YouTube asks, what's your favorite foreign movie that you don't think you would have known about had you not studied the language? Excellent question. And I can tell you immediately my favorite movie, not just in a foreign language, but for language learners, for polyglots. Let me see if I remember the title correctly. In Spanish, it was Casa de Locos, I think. In French, though, the original, it was a French movie, L'Auberge Espagnole. And this is a really fun movie that I happened to see while I was in that Erasmus experience. And it's not really in French, it's kind of the protagonist is French, and the commentary is French, but there's lots of English in it, and there's lots of Spanish in it, and a couple of other languages. And it's about a French student who goes to Barcelona to learn Spanish, and all the adventures he gets in. And it's, to this day, one of my favorite movies ever, and especially as a language learner, as somebody who's traveled, as somebody who's had that temporary experience, and especially Erasmus students will appreciate it. So that is one of my favorite movies in a foreign language. All right, and I hope that answers that question. So thanks for a nice question there. Okay, Supply Grandom02 on Mixer. If one wanted to learn a language like Russian on a severe budget, what tips would you have for them? Okay, so best ways to learn a language without spending money. Let's see. So Russian specifically, what you could do is, first thing you would have to do with a language with a different script is make sure you have that script down. And a good way that I would do this, that has worked for me for like Arabic, and Lauren used it to learn her Russian, and also I've learned other languages like, or other scripts I should say, like Thai, is to use mnemonics to make sure you can read those scripts, and you can do that for free. And my favorite website for this would be Memrise, MEMORISE.com. So if you are on Memrise, you will learn the Cyrillic alphabet, and that's step one, because you want to be able to read the material. Next is, I would say, I'm a big fan of the Pod 101 series. If you search my blog for podcast, you'll see I'll give links to various languages there. And so they would have a Russian Pod 101, and if I was learning the language, I'd go there. And they have a paid option for like more access to their database of lessons, but it's also free if you want to get like some of the more recent episodes. And so you would use that. You wouldn't have to pay for it. Next thing is I would make sure I'm getting speaking practice. And if I'm getting speaking practice, I'm going to be doing it on a conversation exchange site, because then I'm not paying any money. I'm just, in your case, finding Russians who want to improve their English. And so we would speak in English for half an hour, and then in Russian for a half an hour. So that is completely free. And italki has an option to find people who are also learning the language, learning your language, I should say. So those are the first steps. And then for Russian specifically after that, I'm not sure, because I haven't taken on Russian myself, but you could go to your local library. I know even my small town in Ireland, Cavan, have seen books on how to learn Russian, and I don't have to spend any money. I just use my library card, go in and take the books out, and I could learn those books, learn through those books. And if anyone's learning Spanish, French, German, or Italian, and you're completely broke, then why not learn through my books, and without even having to pay money that comes to me? Like, I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but go tell your local library, could you order language hacking, whatever. And I've done this in the past. I've just asked my library, can you order this book I want? And they've done it. You'd be surprised. And you could get, like, within reason, some things that are a bit too specific that they know others wouldn't want. But if you're a beginner learner, or there are, and even some intermediate courses are general purpose enough. So whether it's Russian or any other language, if you ask your local library, and then there's loads of other options. I think if you search around just learning Russian on a budget, learning Russian for free, you'll probably see a few articles that link to things. Just make sure that they are recent. Whenever I do a Google search for things, I like to change the settings so it shows in the last year, depending on how relevant it is, because some materials get updated or they're not available or whatever. So hope that helps with Russian or learning languages in general on a budget. Okay, and before I go on, reminder everybody, look at this. I'm at 91. I can't point. I've got like a reflection here. I'm at 91 followers on Mixer. I'm trying to get this to 300. So I appreciate you guys going here. It only takes a second to link up any Microsoft, Xbox, Outlook, Hotmail account you might have. And then just go to the top right, mixer.com/polyglot, and follow. If I can get to that goal of 300, then Microsoft will potentially help me to promote language learning. Oddly enough, on the Xbox, you would actually open the Xbox and see live streams, and they would promote my streams like this one to encourage people to learn languages. That's kind of why you've been seeing that link, why I'm kind of pushing it as much as I can. So appreciate the follows, anyone who is there, and I will be catching up on all of your questions. I'm going to be over there for the majority of the next hours after I finish this live stream that's on YouTube and Facebook and everything. So thanks guys for going there, following, and I will get to so many more questions. It'll be a lot easier because I know there'll be less people and I'll be able to respond directly to a lot more of you. Okay, so back to the next question there. Okay, so will there be, so DJD on YouTube asked, will there be any other language hacking books coming out? I've used them for German and Spanish, and I think they're great to get you started in language. Thank you for that. We put a lot of work into them. I'm very happy to hear you think they're great. And yes, lots more coming. Lots more. I'm going to potentially make the next one Mandarin. You guys will see confirmations about that, which is one reason why I wanted to boost my own Mandarin. And for languages that I'm not a C level in, which I was a C level for, I think, most of the language hacking books I've just done. I'd say maybe my Italian is B2, sometimes C1, depending on how intense I'm learning it. But my Mandarin isn't, so I actually work with other people, and they are very clever people who would have extremely high levels of Mandarin, and we work together, and I share my things that I've learned to get my level up to what it was, and then make sure I'm currently active in the language, because I don't want to be making a book that I kind of learned the language but did it years ago. So that's kind of one of my motivations for making Mandarin a big priority. And on top of that, I live in New York. There's so many times I take an Uber and I hear Mandarin and I'm like, oh wow, I can try a conversation, but I want to be better at it. So Mandarin's probably going to be next, and then I forget what the other ones are. We're kind of in discussions about those, but you will definitely see a lot more. So keep your eyes peeled, and we'll be getting into languages I don't speak. I'll be kind of collaborating with people to make sure they're doing it in the same style that I would for languages I don't know. So we're going to expand that series a lot. Thanks for the question. All right. All right. Sandy Allen had asked a question about learning Cyrillic, which I happen to have just answered a few minutes ago. So yay, I've kind of doubled that. Mike Cole asked on Mixer, have you tried using Twitter to find language exchange partners? My friend has recommended that to me. Seems like an interesting idea. I can't really say Twitter would be a good place to get language exchange partners. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure people would have done it. I imagine there's lots of success stories there. But just how I use Twitter a lot, and how I see it, it's too public. You're just kind of shouting out. It's like standing on a building and saying, hey world, here's some news or whatever. And I would imagine, and it's too general. There, like, you might message people who speak a particular language, but the likeliness that they are going to want to help you with your project to learn that language, I don't know much about that. I would prioritize communities where people are genuinely learning the language in an intensive way. Okay, so I mean, of course there are exceptions, and there might even be Twitter lists that segment into people who are into language learning that are relevant to particular languages. But I would not use Twitter specifically. I'd use language or sites that are better suited to that kind of thing. Okay. All right. Primal Harp 94739 on Mixer asks, how long would you say it takes to get back into level in a language after a couple of years away? Did 11 months in China and did well, but now have been in the US for 2 years. Hate the idea of starting again. I think I kind of covered that one in discussing how I'm getting into my Mandarin. And how much time it takes is I would only be guessing if I had to be honest, because I'm not really sure with my Mandarin. For all I know, I could only need like 1 or 2 weeks, and I might be right back to where I was before. Realistically, I think I'm actually going to probably, because I'm not doing it with the same level of intensity, because I'm still working on multiple projects, I'd say it's probably going to take me maybe 2 months of part-time like revisal and studying and language lessons to get to where I was, where I had been after 5 months of extremely intensive learning. So that's kind of my estimate, but there's no scientific basis behind that, and I could be way off, and we'll see. And I probably will have more to say on that, so maybe ask me that question in a couple of months, and I might have some interesting answers for you. Okay, let's see. Next question. Daniel asks over on YouTube, hey Benny, I have 5 hours available each day to study Italian. How can I use those 5 hours in the most useful way? Very good. I like that question. So I would say when you have that sounds like the amount of time I would have had in a lot of my projects. And the way I worked it was I would have a scheduled spoken session with teacher at the end of my day. I mean, presuming I wouldn't be tired at that time. At the end of that 5 hours in your case. So maybe schedule something with a teacher on italki, or maybe find a friend who you want to be able to speak Italian with, and tell them you'll meet them at a particular time. Make sure it's scheduled with a real person. You're not putting in like your Google Calendar just, like text message this guy to let him know I want to talk to him, or that you put in a calendar just that you will watch a TV show at that time. You need to have a person you're going to see, because then there's this sense of like you don't want to disappoint them, you don't want to let them down by not showing up on time. And that was a great motivator for me. So I would have that at the end, and then what that meant was the other, like if it's a half-hour spoken session, the other 4.5 hours are all about making sure you're going to do as well as possible. And that pressure forces you to study in a lot more of a strategic way. So in my case, I would not be studying general vocabulary about shoes and learning how to say shoelace, and as a classic example. Instead, I'd be like, okay, in my last spoken session, I was not able to talk about like what I want to do next week. So I'm going to figure out how I can maybe say one way of talking about the future, and like see if I can like find a hack to use like a modal verb. So I just have to remember this one word, and I could put other ones after it. And you have a more self-guided and more of a pressure to have practical studying of the language. And of course your teacher can give you advice as well in that case. But just that pressure of an upcoming thing means that what you do in the other 4 hours are specifically fixing problems that you have. Because if you go through a course, courses tend to be more about the long term, passing an exam at the end of the year. And I use course books in my intensive project more as a reference point rather than as my main basis of this is how I'm learning the language every day. So that's what I would say. I would say have that spoken goal that you're going to be aiming towards. All right? Okay, so next one. Brian Torres on Facebook asks, how much do you read? How? And what kind of books? All right. I would love to read more. I don't read enough in English as it is, just because of bad time management. But essentially, the kind of books that I read when I do in other languages tend to be, I would say, the more well-known classics. So in French, for instance, I've read several Jules Verne books, and the way I read them is on the Kindle. And the Kindle is great because for at least the major languages, it gets less useful for less common languages. But for the major languages, you can just like tap a word and use an internal dictionary, or you can buy a monolingual dictionary, which is what I do, and something I'll get to in early in the first steps questions. But I click a monolingual dictionary for advanced learners is especially useful, and I see what the word means explained to me in French. So I would use the Kindle and kind of read classics and the biggest, most famous books. Like in Spanish, I've read Cien años de soledad, 100 years of solitude. And yeah, so that's kind of what I like to read, but I do need to do that more, both in English and in other languages. So I'm hoping I can manage my time a little bit better, because I really enjoy that. And I would only do that for my top languages, though. I would never make reading a major way I use my time in the beginning stages. I feel reading is way more useful to kind of get yourself a mastery in the language after you've gotten through the beginning stages. So that's one caveat I would have, is for me reading is for the B2 and up levels, beyond just like reading notes and reading basic exercises. It's different for different people. Some people have reading focused goals, so they have to read from the start, and that's fine. But in my case, I find I get more satisfaction if I can speak the language with people, and then later on kind of get into the deeper parts of it. All right. So Trevor Cox on YouTube says, have you found Irish speakers in New York? I have. And something very funny, when I first moved to New York, I was invited by I forget their full title, but they were the Irish Culture Center, I think. And I got invited to speak there in Brooklyn. When I arrived in the building, I didn't know if I had to go up the stairs or down the stairs for where I was speaking. So I went down the stairs, which was wrong. And I was kind of lost. And I opened the door and I walked in, and there were like 4 random people there. And I was about to ask them in English, obviously, because I'm in New York area. I was about to ask them, where is the event going to be? I'm actually speaking. And they turned to me and they said, Conasata to Benny. I wanted to on shot on, and they started speaking in Irish to me, and I was like super confused. I was like, did I just step through a portal to like the Gaeilge or something? And it's because I happened to be crashing an Irish language class, which was very surprising to me. I didn't know they were holding language classes there, and so that was a random and fun moment for me in finding Irish speakers in New York. And otherwise, I've gone to 1 or 2 language events and found people who have spoken Irish to me. So, yeah, that answers the question for you. Okay, so next one, HI3MPZ on YouTube says, I'm studying French now, but I'm getting lazier and lazier. Why do I feel this way? I'm so sad about it. How do you study a language without getting bored? Very good. Okay. So, yeah, what that is, if I am going to guess at like one very likely reason, is going to be the plateau that you're reaching. So what's happened to me in many cases is I've had my intensive dash through the language, and things have been going great and great and great and going up and up and up, and then suddenly I reach my plateau, and I don't find I'm making a lot of progress, and I don't find it as interesting, and I find I don't want to spend as much time learning the language and so on. So that plateau is what you want to avoid, and it also leads to boredom. You're not going to enjoy the process as much. So to avoid that, if you're at a plateau, it's because what you're currently doing in the language is both boring and not helping you make progress. So you need to really examine how you're spending time using or learning the language. And for me, the most ideal language learning approach is not a single approach. So I'm always telling people, speak from day one, get a native speaker or a teacher or a lesson or whatever it is and speak to them, like, without having to study for years. And people would say, that's my approach and that's what I would do for the entire time I'm learning a language. But no, that is definitely not what I recommend. I only recommend that as the actual start stages. And then when I can have those basic conversations, it starts to get boring and I need to switch things up a bit. I need to actually actively tell the people I'm speaking to give me trickier conversations. I need to start listening to podcasts or even radio or whatever it is. So I change things. So if you're finding the French or you're getting lazier and the French is getting boring, it's because of what you're doing. So the things you're doing, the books you're studying, the approach that you have, even if it's the things that I tend to suggest to people, like speaking via Skype, that those things are not helping you. It doesn't mean French is something you need to give up on. It just means your approach needs to be adjusted. So find completely different things to do, things that are more fun. For instance, you can read comic books in French. You can start watching comedy shows and movies, and you can start meeting different types of people, maybe going to meetups that combine French with a hobby that you have. There are so many different things you can do that can make the language more enjoyable and that can spice things up and just change what you're doing, because right now it's not working. And regardless of how anyone, including me, would have said, this is what you have to do in the language no matter what, you need to realize if it's not working for you, you need to do something else, you know? So I don't know what that is in your case, but try to see, is there something different that can spice things up a bit, okay? All right, so hope that answers that question for you, HI3 MPZ. Okay, quick reminder, everybody, I'm only going to be doing this for maybe 10 more minutes, so I'm currently at 95. Let's see if you guys can push me over 100 before we end this call. Let's go to mixer.com/polyglot and follow me, and then in about 35 minutes from now I'm going to be starting several hours over there about the specific topics you can see here at these particular times. Okay, so see you soon over there. All right, but last 10 minutes or so, let's see. Nicholas on YouTube says, hi Benny. Hi Nicholas, oh my god, hi. I've been learning German by myself for about a month, but I struggle with vocab memorizing and grammar. How could I do this? Thanks. That's a very good question. I'm going to ask Holly to push that into the first steps, and I'm going to answer that among the first questions that we'll be dealing with in just over a half hour, if that's all right. Okay. Isaac asks on YouTube, Benny, how do you get over the fear of talking with people? Very, very good question. Tricky one as well. There's a story I always like to tell people about this, that some of you would have heard me say this before, but it's the answer I feel addresses this the best way. Is I remember when I was learning German, and I wasn't shy to approach people, but I met a lady at this social event who was shy about practicing her English. She initially, since I had talked to her friends and kind of talked to her a little bit, she initially said, oh, can I practice my English with you? And I had to say, I'm sorry, I'm in intensive German practice mode right now. I really want to stick to German. But I met 2 American guys over there. You should totally go and talk to them. And I was saying this in German. And she said, I can't, I'm too shy. I can't walk up to people. The only reason we're talking is because a friend introduced us. And I realized, like over the years, that the I'm too shy thing can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You tell yourself that, which kind of is extra motivation to not even do that, even if the initial conversation was something you could do yourself regardless. So to demonstrate that to this lady, you know, at first I said, oh, go on, you'll be fine. And she was like, no, I'm too scared. I can't possibly approach them. I feel they'd laugh at me. They wouldn't want to talk to me. So I was like, okay. And she wanted to know, like, how am I learning German the way I was? So what I did was I took her mind off the stress of approaching those 2 people. And I said to her, oh, do you know about how more blood to the brain makes you smarter. And she was like, that sounds a little silly. And I was like, no, trust me on this. And she had some drink in her hand. And I was like, watch this. If you raise your arm above your head, then more blood is going to your brain. And this means you're going to be smarter and more confident to speak English with those people. This is obviously absolute nonsense, you know? But while I was telling her this, what she didn't realize is, like, I was kind of, you know, pushing her hand up and, like, gesturing this nonsense to her. We were actually walking towards the Americans. And since I had control of her wrist, when we were close enough to them, I clinked her glass to theirs and I ran away. I was like, ah. So what I left her with was her actually clinking that glass, and then the Americans turned around and she had to speak to them. So what I did is I took away her hesitation. I took away all of the doubts, you know, that I feel like if you're shy, you want to talk to somebody, the reason you're not is you are going through in your head all of the things that can possibly go wrong. You're thinking, I don't have anything clever to say. They're going to think I'm an idiot. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to be offended by how bad my language is. And you thinking all of these things is what's preventing things. So my secret, I don't think about it. I see an opportunity and I just go for it. I don't think, what's a very good, clever first thing to say? No, hello. That's the first thing that I say in whatever language it happens to be. And I just wing it. And it's harder to do that initially. So I always tell people, don't think about it. Just like, if I have to, I will physically push them to just take that opportunity. So if you feel that you are shy, if you feel you've got this fear of talking to people, then whenever you see that opportunity to speak with people, try to think like, not, ooh, should I do this? Or just try to go for it. It's hard, I know, conceptually. But maybe if you're with some friends, tell them, whenever there's an opportunity, can you just push me towards them? Or, like, try to make it your instinct, like a knee-jerk reaction. You see a language, speak. You see people speaking that language, speak to them. So, that's kind of a quick answer. Obviously, getting over fear is a more complex thing. There are larger things at stake that I can't really get into in a live thing like this. But that's what I would advise if you want to give it a whirl. So, hope that little story of mine helps. Alright, so let's see. Jeet on YouTube asks, I want to learn Spanish. I'm learning it from Duolingo, but I don't have any friend who speaks Spanish. Unfortunately, I'm not able to put to use what I'm learning. Please suggest what to do. Okay. I would say Duolingo's good, but I only ever use that, or tell people to use it in combination with stuff, because it's, as a gamified system, it's more that you're kind of waiting somewhere, you're using that app. It shouldn't be the core thing you're learning. And that's the problem, is a lot of us would use something, we'd use it like very intensively, and feel like after we use that thing that we should be able to speak the language better than before. But it's like learning to ride a bike. The way you do it is sitting down on the bike and pedaling, and like no amount of reading about it ahead of time is gonna give you an advantage for that. So if you can't put to practice with people, then maybe it's because those situations that you could are too intimidating. So for instance, if you're an absolute beginner and you have a circle of people who speak Spanish that you want to like integrate into and start to practice with, the problem is, as an absolute beginner, that is not the most ideal place to get your first practice, because they are native speaking between one another and they're going to be speaking very quickly, and that's intimidating. So what I found is, as a beginner and as a lower intermediate learner, I cannot practice with groups of people. They either all have to adjust for my benefit, but that's not ideal, of course, or they have to just keep on talking and feel bad that I don't understand them. So generally, one-on-one conversations, and not with strangers all the time, because you might not know the culture very well, and if you try to speak to like a waitress and have a conversation, she might be busy or distracted and kind of that makes you feel like she's judging your language level. So generally, a one-on-one session with somebody who's experienced in speaking with a beginner is what I would recommend. And regardless of if you use a tool like Duolingo or if you're going through a course, that's something just to keep in mind, that you might be pushing yourself a bit too hard. It's the same with people who try to watch TV. If you try to watch a TV show, even after you've studied a language a long time, or watch the news, they may be speaking so fast that there's no way you would be able to understand until you've gotten enough listening practice and speaking practice. So no amount of studying books is going to change that. And that's fine. You don't have to feel bad about it. You just have to realize that there are ways that applying what you've learned can be used more efficiently. And I found getting into those complicated conversations, being able to understand TV and so on, for that, I need to be actively engaged with a human being for as long as I can. And I just need to accept that as a beginner, I need to someone speaks slowly and patiently to me. So hopefully that helps address your issue. Okay. Luke asks, how would you prepare for a holiday where your target language is spoken? I'm going to Hong Kong and I'll attempt no English, only Cantonese for 2 weeks challenge. Any advice or tips? Great thing. I would say, firstly, to make all of your time involved in like learning the language ahead of your trip, because you don't want your trip to have a lot of time with you studying. You know, if you can learn it more before you arrive, then that's a way better idea. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, spoken practice, because like for a trip as a tourist, like, yeah, there are things like signs that you'll want to read, but in your case, if you're going to Hong Kong, then you're going to have great difficulty reading the actual Chinese characters if you're doing it in such a short time. And on top of that, a lot of signs in Hong Kong do have English translations in a lot of places, depending. So I would focus entirely on speaking the language. Cantonese is a tricky one because you've got tones, actually more tones than Mandarin. Even so, if you find a teacher online and try to talk to them with tourist goals in mind, so don't try to aim for knowing all the words. Don't try to see if you can have a debate on some philosophical concept. You're going to be a tourist in the country, so try to gear your conversations that you have ahead of time in those couple of weeks on touristy things, like asking, where is the bathroom? And your teacher will help you get the tones as well as you possibly can in that short period well on that, understanding the responses. So you have those very specific themed approach to your learning. So that's what I would suggest. Okay. Let's see. David asked on Facebook, how do I not forget my second language when I'm in the country learning a third language? Okay, very good question. I had this problem myself when I first got into languages, and I had learned Spanish and I got it to an okay lower intermediate level, and I was happy with that. But then I went to Italy, and I started to kind of forget my Spanish and replace it with Italian, and that was like unfortunate because I didn't want to forget my Spanish. So what I learned after trying this a few times was the best way possible is two things. If you're going to the country and you're only going there for a short time, then I would say just accept it. If you're in a country for just 3 or 6 months, something like that, just accept that you're going to practice the language of that country, and that's going to be your number one priority, your number one focus, and you're going to get the best you possibly can out of that time. And if in that time the other language goes down in level, then you just accept that, okay? But if you're there for a much longer time, then what you should do is maybe have an intensive period first, when you first get there, to learn that language of that country you've just arrived in, and make that the priority, because you need to be able to communicate with people. And then after that, after a few months, then find ways of using your old language. So in my case, when I went to Brazil, I wanted to make sure I could remember my Spanish and my French. So I was in a touristy town, and I actively sought out Argentine tourists, because there were a lot of Argentine tourists in Florianopolis, in where I was in Brazil. And after I was confident my Portuguese was at a good level, I actively tried to speak Spanish to those people. And I would switch. And switching, that was extremely difficult. That took me like several months to get the hang of, because it's not just speaking one language well, or speaking another language well, or speaking the two languages individually as well as you can. There's also the problem that you might be in a situation where you might want to use both languages in a short succession, which is very difficult, because I feel like I have to like grind the gears in my brain to change them between one language and another. And so that was a whole new skill that I had to learn. But in general, when it comes to learning multiple languages, I find that learning one intensively at a time and then maintaining all of them is what I like to switch between. So that's why I might, like in the intensive times of my travels, I had a 3-month project to intensively learn a language, but then the other 9 months of the year were just maintaining that new language and the old ones. Okay, so that's what I would advise. Okay, and then final questions that I'm going to get to for you guys before I take a 15-minute break and then move over to Mixer. Look at this, I'm almost at my first 100. So you guys go to mixer.com/polyglot and connect it to your Microsoft account. It'll only take a second. And then follow me. Click the heart and the blue thing next to Polyglot. And then I will see you. I'll be talking to you in about 20 minutes when I switch to all these next topics. I'm only going to do those on Mixer. I won't be continuing this on YouTube or Facebook. So everyone on YouTube, everyone on Facebook, I will get to your questions if they're about these topics, or if it's a general question, then at this time I'm going to get to it. Just make sure you are on Mixer, all right? And we'll get that follower goal up. So, final questions. Let's see. David asks, how do I not forget my second language while I'm in a country... Oh, sorry, that's the one I just did. I'm bad at keeping track of these things. Okay, Brian, do you use the same approach with learning any new language? My approach in general has always been the same. Actually, like my approach as I start a language universally has stayed the same. Even like I always tell people, speak from day one, speak from day one. But funnily enough, that approach, I even applied it to sign language, because you don't speak it, but I signed from day one in the sense that I was actively trying to communicate in that language in my sessions without having to rely to switching back to spoken English in that case. So all languages, in my case, because my goal is so spoken focused, I want to be able to interact with people, I've always had to speak from day one. Once I realized what over the first 6 months that I had not successfully learned Spanish, and I switched to a speak from day one approach. I've always done that in my languages. But then what I do to get to the advanced stages, that's trickier, and it depends on the language, it depends on my goals. So that does change, intermediate level and up. But as I start a language, it's always going to be speak from day one. Okay? And final question from Deflection on YouTube. Is it helpful to learn Latin for learning European languages? I would say if you want to learn Latin because you want to get an understanding of whatever it is, something historical, maybe something religious, maybe you want to be able to read the signs in Rome. You know, there are reasons to learn Latin, very good reasons, and when people have them, they should do that. But if you want to learn European languages, learning Latin is not the best way to do that. If you know Latin, you have an advantage with European languages, but you have a lot more work with Latin, all of these very complicated grammatical things you have to learn that are not going to help you with European languages. So it's like you put all this work in to get the little benefit from maybe the extra vocabulary and some of the grammatical things. So what I generally recommend for people is, rather than learning Latin so you can speak Latin languages or Romance languages, I would say if you want to give yourself an edge, just pick Esperanto for the reasons I had said before. Esperanto is not what the language is branched off of, but like it may be pretty to think about the language families on a tree branching off, and if you learn the base of the tree, then you're going to be better at the branches. But in practice, that doesn't work, because that base of the tree, that Latin, is just too complicated for the reasons that you are looking for. So I would learn Esperanto. That'll give you the edge for learning languages in general. It will give you a lot of European language vocabulary, Romance languages, as well as a couple of German words and such. But again, if you want to learn Latin for reasons that Latin specifically gives you advantages for, then absolutely do that. And and you will then see ways that the other languages are easier. But if your end goal is just to speak multiple European languages, you're actually just as better learning just French, and then learning Spanish from there, and learning Italian, or whatever order you choose to learn it in. And the one language will give you advantages in the next language. And these are the actual ones you'll be speaking. Whereas Latin, you won't be speaking unless you live in Vatican City, So that's what I would say for Latin. So thank you, everybody, to who have been hanging out and following me so long. And look at this, just in time as we wrap up, we see we've reached 100 followers. Thank you so much, everybody. Yay! So if you're watching this after the fact, make sure to go over on Mixer. I'm going to be there for the rest of the afternoon after a very, very short break of just 15 minutes now. And I'm going to be going through the beginning stages of learning a language on the half hour, and then 45 minutes from now I'm going to be doing pronunciation, and then an hour later I'm going to be doing travel, and finally I'll do some more general language learning questions. So everyone on YouTube, everyone on Facebook, go over to Mixer and follow me there, and you will be able to answer all the questions. There's going to be a lot less people at the same time, so I'm going to be able to see your questions and answer them directly, and chat to you more casually than I have in this crazier, intensive, multiple stream thing here. So thanks, everybody, for checking this out. Really appreciate it. And if you're watching this afterwards, you'll see in the description all the questions I've covered today. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and like on Facebook and all that fun stuff. So I will see you guys on Mixer in a few minutes. Thank you so much for following along, and I look forward to chatting to you all very soon. All right. Happy language learning.